So, hello and welcome to Red Bull Music Academy Festival NYC. We're entering into our first full week of our month-long festival around the city, and I'm very excited to be the host for this event. My name is Todd Burns, and I'm the head of editorial at RBMA. And the man sitting next to me is Alvin Lucier, a pioneering composer. He's a pioneering composer of experimental music and sound installations that explore acoustic phenomena and auditory perception, among many other things. And over the next hour or so, we're going to talk quite a bit about his career. I wanted to get started by asking you about percussion. I know that you aren't a trained musician exactly, but I do know that in college, you played the snare drum in the marching band.
I did.
Why were you drawn to the drum as an instrument early on?
I was a kid. I loved jazz. I had a set of drums in our basement. Spent hours playing, improvising. At a certain point, I discovered I wasn't going to be very good at that. I couldn't. Anyway, when I went to college, I played in the marching band. You know, I'm going to jump to something else. We used to play in the Yale Bowl. You know? The band would start playing in a tunnel. You start playing a hell of a sound. I'd be in the back of the band. As you went out into the Yale Bowl, that sound would just echo. You can imagine going from an terribly reverberant, enclosed space to this huge, the time delay, you could hear your echo. So I say it because I think that was more interesting to me than playing. The space. The space of that was just amazing. Anyone who plays in a band knows that the last line and the first, you have to be aware of the time lag. But when you're marching and your sounds are echoing off buildings, you really have to think about. So that was an experience that I got. I may not have gotten that if I'd played a wind instrument, I don't know. But anyway, that was very important.
Did you realize that at the time, the echo, and did it kind of click for you, or was that something that only came later in retrospect?
Came later. You know, I mean, I knew what was happening, but to use it in my work came.
And you, when you were in college, you were studying music.
Right.
But it was more this neoclassical, Stravinsky-inspired stuff.
I wrote a piece my senior year, and by accident it turned out to be it was a very successful piece. I even thought, this is wonderful. I met it was a woman in the Yale School of Music. It was wonderful. I was an undergraduate at Yale. In those days, you could take courses in the music schools as a professional music school. So after my sophomore year, my friends all became people in the music school, not the undergraduate college. I mean, there were that period of time, there were like 5 or 6 young male players from New Haven, the Italian guys, all played saxophone. They all wanted to go to Yale to study a legitimate instrument. That's what it was called, flute, bassoon, so they could get jobs in studios. They could play 2 or 3 instruments. So I found those guys terribly interesting. I used to talking for hours about embouchure, tuning, stuff like that. So I wasn't too interested in my Yale college friends as much as I was these guys. It was a wonderful experience. I had the best of both of those worlds. So
you mentioned Italians, and you went you went to Europe and Italy specifically.
Well, I shouldn't. You can't say that now. That name, Mike Manone, Joanne, Paul. They're all Italian. Yeah, I went to Italy, but that's not the reason I went. I got a Fulbright.
When you went to Europe and Italy, it seems like it was kind of a breakthrough moment for you. It was the moment of realization.
I studied with a man named Petrassi, Goffredo Petrassi, excuse me. I should know better than to bump a microphone.
You of all people.
And I got there and I showed him I had written a piece for flute, harpsichord, and string orchestra. Can you believe that? And he looked at the score, he said, it's too traditional. You have to study with my assistant. So I studied with this fellow, Boris Porena. And it was wonderful. We looked at Gesualdo. Gesualdo was an Italian, it was 16th century composer, but he was offbeat. His imitation would be free. In other words, the counterpoint was not strict, it was sort of free and open. So composers like Luigi Nono, they were interested in this guy because he was sort of experimental. Actually, he killed his wife too. She found her in bed with another man. I think he killed the man or killed this. They never put him in jail though. It was an understandable murder. Anyway, we looked at Luigi Nono. His use of the 12-tone row, if anyone is interested, was very different from the other European composers. Anyway, I looked at that music and I remember Frederick Shevsky and I, someone went up to Darmstadt. Darmstadt, that was a big European summer school. Boulez was there, Stockhouse, and all the European composers. John Cage had been there the 1 year before. David, remember David Tudor had a piano. He taught piano. I snuck into his session. I don't think he ever touched the piano at all. It was about piano. In that class was Stockhouse, Adorno, Theodore Adorno. Does anyone know that? Adorno, Namjoon Paik, a lot of composers. And they had the big argument. I remember Stockhouse and then Adorno. Huge argument about what this music was, John Cage's indeterminate music. They went on and on and on. Finally, David Tudor looked up and said, I'm afraid you gentlemen don't understand this music at all. That was shocking to say to those guys. But John Cage, he went over there to give talks. Instead of giving boring talks, he told funny stories. He told stories didn't have anything to do with music. But it was wonderful, refreshing. I thought, what is this? Those Europeans, it was in their blood talking analytically, set theory and all that. It was in their blood. I said, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in that. So I went home and I thought, if I wrote music like that, I could survive. I'd get a job or something. But it wouldn't be my music. I'd be speaking another language in kind of a dialect or an accent. I don't want to talk music in an accent. I want my own music. So for 2 years, I got home. Got a job as the choral director at Brandeis Didn't know what to do. One night, David Behrman had a party in New York, and Morton Feldman was there. I hadn't even started as a choral director. This was August. I hadn't seen my students at all. He said, "Oh, you teach at Brandeis." He was impressed because he never went to school. He never went. Anyone who taught in the university, he thought that was. He said, "I'm doing a concert in Town Hall. Can you bring your Brandeis singers down?" I said, "Sure." I hadn't even seen these kids yet. They didn't know what contemporary. He said, he had this wonderful laugh. He said, "Can they sing modern music?" I said, "Sure they can." I had this courage from my. Anyway, so I formed I had a large group. I had a small. Went down and did that performance, and that was. Even at that point, I didn't know what I was doing. Then that must have been 62, 63. John Cage. I was at Brandeis. We had the Rose Art Museum. I thought, I'd like to have John Cage come here. I didn't dare ask my colleagues in the music department. They would have thought I was insane. Sam Hunter, director of the Rose Art, he had acquired paintings of Jasper Johns and all of John Cage's friends. I said, "Sam, would you like to have John?" He said, "Yeah, call him up." I called up John Cage. He answered the telephone. Composers from other countries would come and say, "Tell me, how can I get a hold of John Cage?" I said, "Why don't you call him on the phone?" He said, you wouldn't call Pierre Boulez on the phone. You wouldn't ask. I called John Cage. He said, "Hi, Alvin Lucier." He said, "I know you. You were down here doing some stuff here in New York. So would you like to come to Brandeis?" And Rose Art, he said, "Sure. On one I'll do it on one condition. You have to do a piece." I said, "I don't have a piece." Long silence. I said, "But I've been working with a brainwave amplifier, but I can't get it to work." He laughed. He said, "It doesn't matter. If you can get it to work, you have to try to get it." The intention was so important for him, intention of doing it. I said, "Okay, I'll do." All my colleagues at Brandeis, they thought it was kind of something. The idea of using alpha waves for a piece wasn't very interesting. They thought it was kind of I don't know what they thought. One of them said, "Well, you should record the sound of your brainwaves, Alvin, and make a tape piece out of it." I thought, well, that's not important. What's important is try to generate alpha before an audience. See, you've got to do it live. See, John Cage and David Tudor were devoted to live electronic music. Studios in other countries, the one in the West German radio, made these beautiful tape pieces. You'd record sounds on tape and mix them. You'd have a beautiful, clear, structured tape piece. The people would sit in the audience. It'd get dark. Sounds would come out of a pair of. You never saw any. I have to go back. If you don't mind, I'm just talking.
Oh, please, go ahead.
MIT once. I was teaching at Brandeis that time. There was a big storm. Cage and Tudor came to perform at MIT. I took a bunch of my students down. And then David Tudor had his tables, his electronic wires hanging all over the place. They didn't know what things were, you didn't know what was happening. I thought, these guys are working hard. They're not waiting for somebody to come and ask them to do it. All my other friends at Brand were waiting for the Boston Symphony. Asked them to write a symphony. They play it once. they were bitter and angry. Nobody was playing their work. Cage and Tudor, he didn't care. They went out and played it themselves. Very inspiring. So anyway, that interested me a lot. So when I did my brainwave, the night before I didn't know what my piece was going to be actually. In those days, it was wonderful. If you had your equipment, you sort of had your piece, but there were no guidelines. I mean, there were no engineers would come in to help you. I had to grab loudspeakers from people's houses. Can I borrow your can I borrow your amplifier? You didn't patch it together. You didn't know whether it was going to work or not. It was exciting. In those days in Cambridge, the acoustic suspension loudspeaker was being developed by KLH, the first home audio, I talk like I'm an old. Anyway, in those days. Anyway, so I didn't,
So tell me about this performance of this piece. The day before, you're still not sure that it's going to work.
Well,
and then you get there.
I had, talk about percussion. I thought, when I was in the studio at night trying to generate alpha, I finally got, so I felt I was generating, I could see the meter on the tape machine. I looked up at it, we had one of these acoustic suspension speakers on the wall. I see the cone of the speaker actually moving. The cone of the speaker bumping. Alpha waves are low 10 cycles a second. I thought, heck, these speakers, that's not the end of the music. They're performing. They're doing work. These speakers are actually, so I just put two and two together. I collected 16 percussion instruments. Bass drums, snare drums, gongs, cymbals. The Rose Art Museum at that time was on one floor, the little stairway down the middle. Bottom floor was a pool of water. I just put this, I said, just scatter these instruments all over the place. I put a loudspeaker up against each instrument, so that when the burst of alpha came, they would actually perform the instrument. What's interesting was that because a gong takes more energy to make sound than a snare drum, so built into that system is just the instruments themselves cause the way the piece works. Because you'd wait for a large burst of alpha to make the gong sound, but the other instruments would respond in various ways.
And was someone controlling the mixer in terms of what you could hear?
John Cage did that. I had 8 Dynaco amps stacked upright. We had no mixer, 8 stereo amps. My alpha wave amp went into the first one, pushed the mono switch, came out of one. So by the 8th one, it had enormous gain, because each stage loud enough. So John Cage said, first of all, I said, I think the piece should be 8 minutes long. He said, no, it should be 40 minutes. 40 minutes in 1965 of a guy sitting there with his eyes here. It was a long time. But Cage, David Tudor confessed to me, all the years they played in the Brooklyn Academy of Music, he never knew what loudspeaker was coming out of what channel. It didn't matter. I mean, why does it matter? He turned a dial, sound would come out. Their works were not made in that way that some of the composers, in other words, so John Cage just mindlessly went from channel to channel, which is the way it should be. So I didn't want any buildup of any climax. I didn't want it to grow. I didn't want one of those growth forms. So Cage would just turn a volume and drum, boom, 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 drum, turn another one, different sounds. So his form of playing it was wonderful. It wasn't that dramatic.
Seems like there's a sense of humor there, too, a little bit, in a way. And I think that's kind of underrated about what John Cage and them were doing, is that there was a joy or a sense of humor about what they were doing.
On that MIT stage, I remember Cage would say to David, David, can I plug this into this? He'd say, no, John, this is an amplifier and that's an amplifier. John Cage had no knowledge. He had the terrific insight into his music was about what electronic environment was, human beings. His piece for the 12 shortwave radios, people misunderstood that. One of the stories about that was they played it at 10 o'clock at night. All the FM stations were off so that the sounds, and that's not true at all. He had, that piece had, according to 1,000, he had numbers. The idea was that he wasn't trying to get radio stations. He was using those as electronic studios. He had white noise, static, radio. So people misunderstood. They loved to tell that story, that it was so late at night that the piece didn't sound. That's nonsense. Anyway, he was a genius. He was the first guy in environmental music. In Milan, when I was in Italy, I had a woman at the Fulbright office got me a week or 2 weeks up in the studio up in Milan. I went up there, I listened to all the pieces. The engineer came in and said, you know, John Cage was here. I said, oh God. He said, I showed Cage the whole studio. He drew it all in pen and ink, all the oscillators. Then he said, if you got a portable tape recorder, go out into the city of Milan, record sounds of the city. He was the first person who did environment, if you don't mind me using that word, environmental sounds. Yeah. His music was about that, not about technology, what the studio can do. And you know, I'm not explaining that as clear as I want to.
What was the reaction to music for solo performer? What did people say?
One of my colleagues pretended he was asleep. No one gave him, you know that old thing, you put a match in someone's instant, you light it, it's a hot.
Hot foot.
He gave him he did that to the guy that was asleep. I thought, these are my friends. Anyway, I don't know. People.
I guess, were you spurred on to do more things by the reaction, or were you flying in the face of what people were saying? Did it feel like you were on to something when you did this?
I didn't care about what people were saying so much. I felt that was a breakthrough for me. The performer doesn't have to move. It was a start. To make that piece, you have to sit. You can't really move. Your alpha waves stop. They don't stop. They're not loud enough. You can't, if you keep your eyes, the idea was to get in a semi state of, that's not really true either, because people have EKGs all the time, EEGs all the time. You go in the hospital, put electrodes, they tell you just to relax, your alpha gets strong enough. Well, it was hard to do in front of audience, but by the time you have your piece set up, you're so tired. You worked all day setting up your loudspeaker. I was glad to sit there and not move at all.
Let's talk about perhaps your most famous piece, I Am Sitting in a Room. You wrote it in 15 minutes or something like
well,
this,
Edmund,
right?
Edmund, this scientist, Edmund T. Vaughan, he was working for the Air Force, and he was the guy that loaned me his amplifier to do for solar performance. He was kind of a interesting scientist. Pilots during the war were having epileptic fits when their planes would land and the propellers would spin at certain speeds, locking into some visual. And they wanted him to find out why this happened. So he had this big amplifier. Anyway, he was the guy that loaned me his amplifier. About a year later, I'm walking in the hallway. He just passed me. He said, you know, I was at MIT, there was a guy named Bose, developing a new kind of a speaker. All he said to me was, Bose would produce a sound, play it back through his recycle sounds through his equipment to make sure that the response of his loudspeakers were flat. That's all he told me. I thought, well, this is a nice idea. So I went in to my studio and I tried it out. I just said something. It sounded pretty good. I went home one night. I got 2 field recorders from the ethnomusicology. They had these wonderful tape recorders. One, I had my speaker and microphone. So, well, I'll give this thing, I'll give it a try. Should I use sounds, music? I'll use speech. I thought speech, we all have speech. It's interesting. Speech has all these sounds. So I said, okay, so I set up I had a microphone, put my 2 tape recorders outside the room so they wouldn't make any noise, turned off the radiators, turned off the refrigerator. I thought, well, now what? So I just wrote the text. I don't know, I sat there. Thought I don't want to hide anything from anybody. In those days, you know, if you wrote atonal music, you'd write these complicated tone rows. You'd never hear the tone rows, you'd hear them, everything is hidden. The technique of the composition is hidden, you know. I thought, I'll just, you know, this is embarrassing to say, but I used to go see the Judson dance group, and Trisha Brown did a piece. I misremembered it. I didn't remember it correctly. I thought she was telling me what she was doing while she was dancing. My memory of that one. I should say I'm raising my right hand. So I thought, I'll tell people what I'm doing. That'll be the subject matter. I didn't want to use a poem or a text or anything highfalutin. So I'm sitting up there in a room, probably not the one you're in. I'm recording the sound, and I just wrote it out. So I recited it into the microphone, went out in the room, made sure that the meter wasn't, the tape wasn't saturated. Spent the rest of the night outside the room re-recording that. That's how I did that. Very simple.
It's amazing how resonant it's been over the years, and how, I guess that's a good word, resonant. Like, MoMA bought the piece, and people have like recorded different versions of it over the years. Has there been any surprising versions that people have presented to you that you said, oh, that's a really clever?
I had a wonderful. 2 years ago, I was at MIT. MIT has come up in my life a lot. You don't think of MIT music, but John Cage. I was asked to I do this piece at MIT. It was a young 10-year-old boy sitting there. I did that. As I came off the stage, he said, "That was cool." I thought, I'm 85 years old. A 10-year-old kid saying, "That is cool." A week later, he sent me a version he made at home with his laptop. Perfect. I am sitting in a room. Everything, perfect version of that. So that, I love that idea.
Could you have ever imagined back then that people would be performing this years and years later?
I never thought about that. What has surprised me, there's a whole group of young people who want to recreate those pieces. I know that David Behrman's analog pieces, guys are doing new versions. There are young performers who want to do that kind of thing. So I never thought, I never thought about it. I thought someday maybe somebody would do those pieces.
One of the most interesting things that I don't think gets talked about a lot is that you were a professor for many, many, many years.
50 years.
I read a book that you published a number of years ago called Music 109, which is basically essentially transcriptions of lectures that you gave to first-year students.
Yeah.
Tell people about what that class was and how you approached teaching that class.
Came back from Europe. I thought, how am I going to teach? I have this speech impediment. I mean, by God, when you teach, you have to talk all the time. I discovered if I'm talking about something I really know about, I can do it. You know, so when I taught this, I never read a book and would teach something from a book. It was all something that I had experienced firsthand. I'd say, well, John Cage was at this, I did this. I'd tell stories. I say to my class, I'd say, I'm going to tell stories. I'm going to go off on various tangents. If you don't like that kind of teaching, don't take this course. I also would I'd say, I'm not interested in your opinions. I'd say, I'm interested in your perceptions. You know? Don't tell me a piece is weird. Tell me what's William Carlos Williams. Someone said, Mr. Williams, what does this poem mean? He said, don't ask me what it means. Ask me what I've made. So I had a senior take the class once. He said, your exam was terrible. You actually wanted facts. They wanted to talk about how they feel about, I'd ask simple questions like, what's the difference between the way Terry Riley, Philip Glass, and Steve used little phrases? Very similar, but each one is very different. I want you to know the differences. I don't want you just to say this is repetitious, this is trance music. That's baloney. Tell me exactly, you know. So my courses would be trying to, what's the word? Demystify pieces. Sometimes I have seminars, you read something, you want to talk. It's usually about yourself, how you feel. I'm a composer. I want people to not think about themselves, but what the objective music, what's in the music itself. Does that make sense?
And also in these lectures, it seems like you went out and asked people to perform pieces as part of the class. And I guess that's like that firsthand going out and doing these things immediately brings it to life.
Christian Wolff at Dartmouth, I said, what do I do? He said, get students to make the pieces themselves, perform them, get them involved in that. Then, so that was, we did cartridge music of John Cage. Everyone, that's a wonderful piece. We use old days, phono cartridges, stick things instead of the photograph needles. See, like toothpicks, and make sounds on. It's wonderful. Each student has to realize an indeterminate, a minute or two of indeterminate score. The score is it's not so easy to understand. There are circles, there are clock faces. You have lines crossing. You determine time lengths and so forth. And to do it really as clearly as you can, without putting your own ideas. David Tudor, I invited him to come up to Brandeis once. We did a 2-piano concert. I mean, he played the piano. We did John Cage's music for amplified toy pianos. We each had five or six toy pianos stacked one on each other, amplified with contact mic, playing a bang, huge, enormously amplified sounds. The score, you have to make your own indeterminate score. I worked on it very carefully. I made it as perfect as I could. About a minute into the piece, my determinations came up. Silence for a minute. Well, in those days, a minute of silence, people would scream. They couldn't stand silence. Anyway, and David had almost the same thing. We stopped playing for like a minute. I thought, oh my God, this is terrible. I'm a professor here, students, what are they going to think of me? I went back, the piece went by in like a flash. It was just amazing to have these things happen in the piece. You'd never do that if you were making the piece in any other way, right? You wouldn't have a minute of music and then stop for a minute, you know what I mean? But those silences were so poignant, so wonderful. They were like, and then they weren't like the silent points like Beethoven. They weren't that kind of Brahms and Beethoven. They just were holes in the music. It's just amazing. And anyway,
do you think your sense of time as a performer of your own music and your sense of time as an audience member is wildly different?
My sense of time, well, John Cage's stopwatches, he hated the idea of psychological time. It was a book by a famous composer about time in music, about psychological time, blah, blah, blah. Cage was real time. My time, when I did my echolocation piece, this sounds a little bit, this is true in the time it takes for a pulse to go out into the space, hit a wall and come back, is real time, isn't it? If you make it and it comes back 1 second later, you know that you're 500 feet away from wherever it's reflecting off. It takes half a second time. Sound travels like 1,100 feet a second, something like that. I just wrote a blurb for a book called Whale Song. It dawned on me that a dolphin or a bat using sound echolocation, they can't cheat. You can't cheat if you're going to survive. Trying to eat something, you can't make some sound, say, I think I'll go faster or slower. It's survival. I was thinking of that. I had this sounds so romantic, but this is true. One night I slept, I had a dream. I was in another planet, dark planet, and I had a sound gun of some kind. I was relaying information as to that space I was in to somebody back on Earth. The 2 or 3 days later, I was in a bar in Arlington, Mass. I've been reading a book by a professor called Echoes of Bats and Men. It's about bats, how they echolocate. I thought, these creatures, they're wonderful. They use sound. In the dark, they can avoid a wire. They have to survive. I thought, my music, I wish I could make music that was so not, you know. So I made these pieces where sound goes out. It's in real time space. It's space and time. I know that sounds sort of arrogant of me, but that's true. If you echolocate here, echo, you can tell how far you are away as to the time. So that's my idea about time in music.
One of the things that you've said over the years is that audiences nowadays seem to be able to hold their interest longer in your pieces than you thought.
Someone asked me if young people use their iPhones so distracted. How come? Well, anyway, Charles Curtis and Anthony Bird did a concert of my music in one of these clubs, Stone maybe. I went in, I didn't know anyone in the audience, totally different. I thought, God, this is going to be terrible. These sounds are long, they're going to be bored. I was nervous. They played these pieces, long tones. You could hear a pin drop. People nowadays, a certain group, pay attention to that. I don't know why that is. Because if you distracted all the time, it seems to me you'd have that, you want something else to happen.
Do you find yourself having a longer attention span as you get older?
What did you say? Remember, I went out to Aspen, Colorado. He had Jim Tenney string quartet. He wrote a string based on his beautiful piece for solo violin. We simply go from the G string, D string to A, just go up the strings. And once you know what's going to happen, the form doesn't change, it's inexorable. But you start to listen into the sound. Audience was distracted, this famous Pulitzer Prize winning composer kept turning around to say, what is this stupid music? Then they played a piece by a famous American. Every beat was different. Everything you could ever learn to do on a stringed instrument, sul ponticello, pizzicato, this, that. My mind wandered. It was terribly interesting. Every measure was different. I couldn't concentrate on. Thought maybe I have attention.
ADD.
But the Jim Tenney piece I focused right on. So two different audiences at that time. I don't know. Does anyone know why this is?
It's above my pay grade, fortunately.
You know, when I started teaching, it was de rigueur to say these students are not prepared the way we were. That's a lot of. First thing I'd say to them is, I'd say, you are well, the music you play every day is very amazing. I mean, imagine growing up with groups like electric guitars with those sound effects and noisy. I said, your ears are you're very well prepared to hear this music. Everyone, you know, and I don't know what the answer is to that.
You've been inspired by all sorts of different things that are, you know, like brainwaves, bats, but you've also been inspired by other artistic mediums, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. like a poet, John Ashbery, for example, is someone who's inspired some of your music. What was it about his particular stuff that compelled you to write something?
I met him in Berlin. I was on a DAAD grant. He came to give a lecture. I went to hear from him. The people said, well, what are you doing over here? You're in a different aspect. I said, well, I wanted to hear poetry. So I struck up a conversation with him. Then, years later at West End, Anthony Braxton was the chairman of the music department. He was one of these guys, everything big. He said, Alvin, you have to do a festival, Alvin Lucier Festival. I said, I don't want to do it in my own. I felt a little bit guilty. You have to do it. I said, okay. So having said that, I thought everyone in the music department would rally around me and say, can you use my money for the orchestra? Nobody did a thing. I had to scrounge around everything, get all the support I could. There was a poetry department. The woman in charge of it, I don't know if I said, you know, John Ashbery. She said, oh, we couldn't get him. So why don't I write him a letter? I wrote him a letter. I said, you remember? He said, I remember you. I said, would you like to come to West End and give a poetry reading? And I'd like to make a piece of you. He said, sure, I'll come. He sent me a poem called Theme. If I were a piano show, a porch on someone's house, flooding the suave timbre, then 40 he a unique monsieur, and yet he never wanted to look into it. I didn't understand what it was all about. He would juxtapose different lines. It was wonderful. They didn't have any meaning. I didn't have to worry about meaning, you know? So I made it. I thought, how am I going to do this? I made a big error, big mistake. John Cage, I keep talking about, in San Francisco years before, he'd made some speech pieces using everyday people. I said, I'll get 4 professors in the English department to be in my, I'll have 4, they'll read that poem. Big mistake. They couldn't keep time. Anyway, I thought what I'll do is I'll find like objects like, I had an ostrich egg, milk bottle, vase, different things. I put small microphone, and as they talk, you can hear the resonance of their voice in these objects. I don't think I can do it. Get feedback. Anyway, I had them reading this poem into these objects, so you'd hear the resonance of each object. It was a way of dealing with speech. So I did that piece. But it was mainly, I wasn't so inspired. It was just practical. I knew him. I thought it'd be wonderful to have him come to West End. I did it for that.
It seems like a lot of your career is based on just picking up the phone or just writing a letter or whatever. It seems very plain and simple in a way, but it leads to extraordinary results. There's no question in there. I just wanted to say that. One other piece I wanted to ask you about is Nothing is Real, which interpolates the Beatles' Strawberry Fields Forever. Why did you pick out that?
Well, Aki Takahashi, wonderful pianist, had made, they asked a recording company, Japan asked her to make a series of Beatles songs. She said, sure, I'll do that, but I want to ask composers to make arrangements. So she said, I said, sure, I'll do it. What song would you like me to do? I didn't care I loved the Beatles, but I didn't have any preference. She said, how about Strawberry Fields Forever? I said, how come? She said, I think the line, nothing is real, reminds me of your music. I think it's just the opposite, but anyway. So I took that song. I thought, I'm not going to make another piano arrangement, you know. I thought, what do I do? I thought, you know, when you hear those songs when you're young, you remember where you were when you heard a song for the first time. Have you ever had that experience? I remember, I thought, if I could put it somewhere, song, in a room, and so I thought, well, I had a little pot, little teapot. Several years before I went to Donald Unschlager, he was a scene designer. I asked him, any theaters you can take the roof up and down, you can raise the roof, change the acoustics. So it would have cost $1 million, he said, in those days. I just went to him for that, with that idea. So I thought if I played this song into the teapot, I could lift the lid of the teapot, changing the size of the room a little bit. Then I had to figure out what am I going to put in there. Well, I don't play the piano very well, I play with one finger. As I played the tune with one da-da-da, and I would da-da-da-da-da with the pedal down. If you think of those notes, dee-dee-dee-dee, is beautiful. If you pay attention to the sound as it's sustained, hear the after sound. You know, after sound, you play a chord on the piano here, a rise. It's because a single tone will have 2 or 3 strings. You can't tune the strings perfectly in tune. If they're a little bit out of tune, there's this beat that happens. If you play a chord on the piano, if you pay attention to it, you can hear it. It rises and falls. So I'd da-da-da-da-da, I'd hold that. You can hear the... If you raise the lid, you change the size of it. You should be able to isolate each tone in that. So da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dee-dee-dee. So I did the piece that way, one finger.
You mentioned raising the roof, and I feel like architecture plays just an extraordinarily important role in your music. I think almost of your music as architecture sometimes. How do you view architecture as something?
I never know how to answer. You go to a concert the night before, they say, want to go in and see the space, want to hear the space. I say, no, I don't have to. Don't you want to hear it? No. I use whatever I find. I have no theoretical ideas about. People think I'm interested in architecture. I am, but only in the sense that I'll go in and I refuse to clap my hands. Everyone goes into a room and does this. I find that of no interest at all. What does it help me to? What does it do for me to hear? So if I do a concert in the space, I'm learning what the space is like. If I thought for years I should think about designing concerts, I have no idea about that, honestly.
Do you find your music almost as a learning process, that as though, every time you compose something, you're learning what happens when you do?
Yeah. I think when I'm sitting in a room, I used to watch people in the audience. They finally understand what was happening. You could tell when they understood the piece. It was each one at a different time. You could hear the intelligibility, with that point at which it's intelligible and not intelligible. That takes the place of the dramatic climax of traditional music, where each person, I have pieces where, by accident I discovered this, where a piece for solo wind instrument, and a rising oscillator. Just one oscillator starts at the low note on the clarinet, the high pitch, I decided to make it 30 seconds a semitone. That's a long time to go a semitone. 30 seconds. The player, as the wave is rising, he or she can start a minute before the pitch arrives, stops when he or she arrives at that pitch, in which case the beatable, audible beating, everyone knows about audible beating, when two notes are closely tuned together. You can hear pumps of sound where they constructively and destructively interfere with each other. So they'll start fast and slow down. Gets to unison, there isn't any beating. If you start 30 seconds before and go across the wave, starts fast, slows down, and speeds up again. If you start at unison, it starts at 0 and speeds up. So I just arranged it with I had this fellow at school. He had wonderful control. He could play a pitch a minute long on the instrument. So I made a piece for him where I wrote where the pitches should start. Remember, Frederick Sheffield said, Alvin, you should change the pitch of the oscillate with your hand. Play it with your hand. Well, what good does that do? If you change it, you made a relationship. You have to change it again. I'm not interested in relationships in that way. Anyway, the speed of the oscillator goes the same, but the frequencies go twice as fast. Understand? Every octave, 2, 4, 8, 16, it's geometric. So from the first octave, the beating is slow. The last, it's much faster. So you don't have to change the relationship with your hand, you know what I'm saying? It's changing by itself as it does so. I never knew this was going to happen. I use one speaker. One speaker has the sine wave. The other player plays without any amplification. As the wave rises, the wavelengths get shorter and shorter. They echo off the walls and the wave moves in space. It moves acoustically. It's not electronic panning. It just moves by itself. So you'll hear it cross your head. It'll move, each person at a different time. I didn't know that was going to happen, but that was amazing.
You've done a lot of work starting in the 80s with instruments,
Yeah.
like traditional instruments. And you've said in the past that people just asked you to make stuff who played instruments. But I'm curious, is there a favorite or most interesting instrument that you found over the years that you find has a timbre or something that you actually are really fascinated by?
Not really. I have a cellist, Charles. He's out in San Diego. He loves my music. I make him pieces, as many as I can. He's a wonderful player, and he knows my music, and he plays very well. I'll make him pieces. But if anyone asks me to make them a piece, I try to make them. I stick to, I don't like extended techniques. I know that's been a very engrossing and wonderful thing for people to do, making new instruments, playing instruments, you know, in various ways. I just like to hear the sound of a string, open A string, very different than an open G string. The timbres are enough for me. Very clear. It has to be clear. See, I have to do it. I can't cheat. I'm talking about cheating. I have to have it as clear as possible to make the beating happen. Do you ever understand? A lot of my pieces have to do with beating. Tuning creates beating, which I find fascinating. If you tune your instrument close to an oscillator or another instrument, you can create these beats and they change.
When did you first hear that beating in one of your pieces and you were like, ah, this is what I'm after. This is really interesting.
1980 sometime, I guess. A group of 7 players asked me to make them a piece. I thought, what am I going to do? I tuned to C natural. I just have them tuning against that pitch. I thought it'd be interesting to create rhythms from tuning. I'm not the only composer that ever did that. The idea that you could tune, create rhythms. It's been a very, I make a lot of pieces like that, if somebody asks me to.
I want to open it up to questions in just a little bit, but I guess one of the last things I want to ask you is, what are you looking forward to these days? I know you're traveling still quite a bit.
I'm making a new piece for Athens, for the document. They were going to give me the Acropolis theater, the beautiful outdoor theater, but it cost so much money they couldn't do it. Anyway, I taught a course at Wesleyan for first-year students. They want you to teach seminal. I thought Orpheus, I love that Orpheus myth. Everyone loves that. So I taught a course on the Orpheus myth. We did films. We did Tennessee Williams, Cocteau, poetry, Rainer Maria Rilke, H.D., dance, Stravinsky, you can imagine, Stravinsky's Orpheus. I used to love that music. So I taught this course, and for the front piece of my syllabus book, I discovered it's sort of a bas relief. It shows Orpheus, Eurydice, and a beautiful image. She's in the middle. He's got her hand. She's already been down into hell, and she's gone forever. Thought I'd make a piece for Charles Curtis, could be, and Anthony, and a singer. My text is from H.D. She was a poet, an American poet, beginning of the 20s. She's a friend of T.H. Lawrence. Ezra Pound, Images, wonderful. She wrote a poem called Eurydice. It's from a woman's point of view. The name of my piece is called So You. Starts, she's saying, she's speaking to Orpheus saying, so you, for your arrogance, I didn't tell you to come down and yank me out. Who are you, some man? You didn't ask my permission. There's this wonderful, wonderful feminist poems. So I took the first 2 words of each stanza, it's like, so you, so for, if you, and if. There aren't any nouns or any adjectives, just if I could, you did. So I have, I'm describing, have the oscillator pitches, scan going down to the low C string of the cello and going back up, taking an hour. They split into, one's going 30 seconds to 72, one's going 31, so that they play out. And instead of having loudspeakers, I'm having 9 wine jars, those lovely big. So each wine jar has a loudspeaker in it. The waves come out of the jars, and as they hit the points, each amplitude changes happen. So Charles starts playing across the waves, then the clarinet, then the singer. They come in according to where their voice. The singer, I had her starting at G. She said, I can't sing that high. She starts at C, goes down. So I don't care when as long as they sing play with they're comfortable. So that piece is coming up in June.
And that's in June. Okay.
In Athens.
Something to look forward to. Are there any questions in the audience? If we just wait a minute for a microphone.
Thank you. First, I just wanted to say thanks for coming and talking with us.
Turn the mic on.
I think we're good. Okay, I was just not talking loud enough. I had a quick question for you about pedagogy, because I have the good fortune to teach your work to a bunch of undergrads in a wider course about sound art that's not explicitly related to music. And when I was designing that course long ago, your work kept coming up again and again and again. And even though we got 15 weeks worth of stuff to get through, we keep coming back to your work again and again to this day, because I find it so honest and clear and communicative through experience, not from a position of being didactic or anything like that. And I just wondered, for you, as someone making new work for years and years, did the exchanges that you had as a teacher formally also kind of feed in to the work that I see as being relatively pedagogical at its core? Not that you're trying to preach, but that you're trying to teach through the experience that you have while discovering the work as it unfolds. So I'm just wondering, was there a give and take there in the classroom too?
I don't know if that had any real influence. I mean, if I hadn't taught, I'd probably do the same kind of music. I mean, I'd get a whole different idea, whether I was teaching or not. My ideas came from other sources, I think. I don't think there's any. There probably is some relationship there, but I don't know about that.
Is there a question?
I was just wondering if you had some advice for young composers or young artists.
Yeah, keep doing your own work. Don't be. I remember, this is terrible. When I was 40, 50, Philip Glass's name was in the New York Times every single day. Really. He's a good friend of mine, wonderful composer. I thought, well, we've missed the boat. People love John Adams, Steve Reich, my good friends. I thought we missed them. Who's interested in little pieces I do? But now, the older I get, the more people. I mean, if you stick to it, if you stop, that's a mistake. If you change, I think it's a big mistake to change your work to get to a wider audience. Do your own work as well as you can. That's all I can say.
Awesome, thank you.
And I think it's interesting. Well, I remember Philip Glass saying once that he was driving a cab until he was 40 or something like that. So even, don't stop composing even if you're
he owed
not finding that success.
$90,000 for doing Einstein on the Beach. He got into debt 90. That's a wonderful piece. Did you know Einstein on the Beach?
Seems like most of your pieces are pretty cheap in terms of the cost involved. You're borrowing speakers from friends and this sort of thing.
Years ago, I came home from Germany one night, went to the Brooklyn Academy of Music, Einstein on the Beach. No, I hadn't heard that much earlier. There's a black writer. I was falling asleep, jet lag. I thought, what would I like to do before I died? I'd like to go salmon fishing in Iceland. I did that. I'd like to ride my bicycle across the United States. I did not do that. I went down to Florida Keys. I want to go to Epitaurus, the wonderful classical Greek outdoor theater. I'm going to do that in June. Hear the acoustic. I'd like to do a piece with Bob Wilson. I went home, I thought, you get those ideas all the time. Then what? I thought, well, Ronald Vance, he was a colleague of mine, he was Bob's financial advisor. I called Ronald up, I said, Ronald, I don't ever do that. This once in my life. I said, how can I do a piece with Bob Wilson? He said, why don't you come next week? Bob's having an installation in Soho. Come down, I'll introduce you to him. That is a huge storm, thunder, lightning, flooding. I thought, I'm not going to drive down to... Then I thought, well, if you don't go, all you can say is you never win. I drove through, so I went into this room with 200 people. Ronald called Bob and said, Bob, Alvin Lucier would like. He said, oh yeah, I know who you are. I said, I'd like you to do a piece. He said, well, do a piece. He didn't flinch. He said, speak to Keith McDermott, my assistant, come to Watermill this summer. We did a piece with our students at Westland. I showed up at Watermill. I showed him I had this moving door. I had this door on a platform controlled by a Volvo windshield wiper motor, controlled by a toy sailboat controller. I could move this wall across the space slowly, shining, illuminating it with a high frequency wave. Sound would move around the space. He said, this is great. So 2 days later, he said to Keith McDermott, get me Jack and Jill, all these actors. Came, they sat there on the stage, said, okay, I'm going to make a piece. ABC, ABC, ABC. A is going to be things up, going to be near. B is medium shots. C are going to be landscapes. We started with the 7 actors. I'll never forget this. They're sitting there like this. He'd say, okay, Jack, you get up. No, don't put your hand down. Keep your hand wherever it was. So he'd just do it fast. So he'd say, okay, take 6 steps, stop. He had these, just Korean, just made them do it beautiful. I said, Bob, could you stop a minute? If I could tune an oscillator to a D above middle C, everyone can sing that, men and women sing that pitch. When they're moving, I can have them hum. Again, when they stop, they would stop. Okay, everyone, take 5. Alvin has to set up my loudspeaker. Went through because you can't sing unison with the D, so you hit the beating. It's beautiful. Okay, let's do the next one. And then I saw he had an actor walk. I said, Bob, could you stop a minute? I have an idea. You have an actor walking upstage there. If I could get a drum, a snare drum, I can tune an oscillator as he moves through the crests and troughs of the standing waves, the drum will, okay, everyone take 5, let out. Everything, he never said change something. I don't like this. Every scene I got an idea. And we did the piece. Keith came up to school, interviewed some kids had never been on the stage before. He auditioned them by having them walk across, taking several minutes to walk across the stage. Those people that could do it. So then Bob showed up at night, rehearsed all the next day. We presented the piece the next day. It was beautiful. So I made my piece with Bob Wilson.
Are there any other questions?
Yes.
Does music have a spiritual meaning for you?
No. Not in that. Not. I went to a Benedictine preparatory school. I got out of public high school. My grades were so bad I didn't get into any schools at all. My father said, well, he's not college material. My mother was she'd never been to college. She called me up into her bedroom and she said, I've heard such a thing as preparatory schools. go up to the National Public, find yourself a prepared, you go to school during the summer. So I did. I found a Benedictine school. Why a religious school? I have no idea. I wasn't very religious. I'd been reading Joyce, I guess. I was reading Joyce. Of course, I flunked out of my school. Anyway, Joyce had a funny relationship with his teachers, and he hated the Jesuits. However, he said what the Jesuits gave me was a way to organize my material. I always remember that. He would cut. Anyway, I went to this prep school. During this, I survived the summer. They let me go the next year. I remember a Trappist monastery burned down near Portsmouth, Rhode Island. The monks, they held me. I went into the chapel one day. I saw a monk kneeling there, just contemplating. Came back in 3 hours. He was in the same position. I thought, what's it? He's thinking. If there's any such thing as pure thought, this guy must be doing that. It just struck me. So that image of this person contemplating, the difference between meditating and contemplating. I don't like to do I think thinking of one thing a lot. I think that image stuck in my head. He wasn't pious. He wasn't praying. He was just, his eyes were open. I thought, he's concentrating on one thing in some deep way. I think my mother used to say I had a one-track mind. I think you have to have a one-track mind to be. In that sense, my music is spiritual. In that sense, but not in any spiritual way.
Do you think seeing that monk had any impact on music for solo performer?
Well, yes, except music. I had to be quiet. I didn't decide to do it. It wasn't an aesthetic idea. You have to sit quietly to create alpha, to let your alpha waves get strong enough. So it's my decisions are real. They're not. The fact that those two things intersect isn't maybe, but I didn't think of it in that way.
Are there any other questions?
All right, so I want to preface this question by saying that I hope it doesn't come off as silly, and I hope it's not a sensitive subject, but I did want to ask you about your speech impediment, because listening to your work, it always somehow seemed relevant to the work that you did with time and delay especially. So I guess I was just wondering if that ever influenced or informed any part of the work that you do.
I don't think about it till you just said. No, delay. I remember reading, I read a lot about stuttering. People still don't know why one stutters. I think it's anxiety. I think it's, some people think there's a delay between what you're saying and the feedback you're hearing. There's this idea about delay. I never thought of it in that way, but maybe my interest in delay, and because I'm not the only composer that's been interested in that, but perhaps there is some subliminal, I don't think about that, but perhaps something in there.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. So I'm hoping that you might have some advice for someone whose work is very much informed by yours, although I don't work in sound. I've been developing work with EEG and video feedback loops. And so I'm curious if you've worked with video, if you have any thoughts about that, or if you are just the sound guy.
The guy when I go to October over to Moscow, he wants me to do something that shows visually. I don't like to do that for some reason. I don't know why. It's distracting. He, he said, have you ever done anything with fog? Fog. Can sound, influence fog. It can't, but he's got all these, people give you ideas. I don't want to, although in my original score for the Alpha Wave piece, you know, one of the mistakes we made was that you'd write a verbal score, fairly specific. At the end, you'd always like say, well, I'll broaden it out. At the end, I said, well, you can use the switch. I had this switch that activated by alpha. You could turn on lights. I've never done that, but he said when he said that in the score, so I have to think about, I don't want to do that, unless it were sort of environmental or something, you know, lights are flickering. I guess I've never liked that idea. I've never liked the idea of using alpha waves as control signals. I wanted the direct sound. It's not a sound, it's their pulse. Alpha rhythm is too slow to be a pitch, but you can hear those pulses bursting through loudspeakers. I was much more interested in that than in using other ways that would control electronic equipment. To me, that's the same old stuff, you know. So I don't know. I'm not too interested in that idea.
Are there any other questions? There's one behind you.
Hi, I was just wondering if you have any upcoming performances in this part of the world, I guess, like anywhere in the northeastern United States.
I may do something at the Issue Project room in the spring. I'm not in October, November. I don't have much going on.
Well, if there's anyone in the room who books events, please. He's here. He's ready.
I don't know how ready.
He's here. He's here at the very least.
It's going to be 86 in May. Maybe that's enough.
Well, thank you very much, Alvin Lucier. Really appreciate it.